We're big fans of Star Wars: The Clone Wars on this channel, and you probably are too. There are many things to love about The Clone Wars, and one of our favorite aspects of the show has always been the clones. The Clone Wars brought us a great many dynamic clone characters, with many arcs focusing on the clones and their stories. We love the clones, even if some of them were war criminals. But what if we were to tell you that many of the traits we love most about the clones weren't part of the Kaminoans' original plan? In fact, the clone characters we saw in the Clone Wars only turned out that way due to the influence of Kamino's most elite soldiers, the ARC Troopers. In this video, we'll be explaining why.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The Kaminoans often boasted to prospective clients that their clone soldiers were superior to droids due to their organic nature, but behind the scenes, they actually preferred their clones to be much more droid-like than they let on. The Kaminoans valued the traits that made the clones perform better than most battle droids, most notably their superior creativity, adaptability, and team bonding capabilities, but they saw virtually any other sign of humanity as a defect. They worked hard to suppress their clones' individuality, aspirations, and sexuality, as well as any capacity for emotion aside from mutual bonding and various forms of aggression. For the most part, the Kaminoans were successful. Most clones were, at the time of the Battle of Geonosis, pretty much interchangeable. They were brainwashed slave soldiers who only lived to die for the Republic. The Kaminoans viewed any deviation from this as a defect. On Kamino, clones deemed defective were euthanized without a second thought, since defective clones could be extremely dangerous. For most cloners, this wouldn't be all that unjustified, as defective clones, created with the more common Arcanian method of cloning, were prone to clone madness. This was a sort of psychosis that the Jedi believed was the result of the clones sensing they were of double presence in the Force, which made them violently aggressive. With the Kaminoan cloning method though, clone madness was extremely rare. Their obsession with eliminating defectives was instead a product of Kaminoan perfectionism. When the Kaminoans weeded the ranks, they were a lot more overzealous than most cloners, hunting down even the tiniest trace of imperfection. The clones bred for the Grand Army of the Republic picked up on this and did their best to adhere to the Kaminoans' high standards. This meant that individuality, insubordination, and public displays of any non-standard personality traits were extremely rare among clones at the start of the Clone Wars. During the war, many Jedi found this uniformity extremely uncomfortable and encouraged the clones to loosen up a bit, which many did. However, something else was required for the clones to come into their own. The ARC Troopers were a breed apart. While regular clones and even clone commanders went through extensive genetic modification, the ARCs were essentially carbon copies of Jango Fett, but with a few modifications to make them stronger. Because of this, the ARCs had dramatically different personalities from their normie brethren. Whereas clones were generally social, bonded closely with their squadmates, and were programmed with an extreme collectivist mindset, the ARCs were loners, each of them dark and brooding in their own unique ways. The original Alpha class ARC Troopers were produced in a batch of just 100 clones, all trained by Jango himself. The Kaminoans intended for them to be the perfect soldiers, one-man armies with the intelligence, skill, creativity, and armament to turn the tide of almost any battle. But the Kaminoans also considered the ARCs dangerous. After the ARCs completed their training, the Kaminoans had them all put into suspended animation, keeping them as a last resort, only to be released if Tipoca City was about to be overrun. The Kaminoans didn't just fear the ARCs because of how powerful they were either. Their fear stemmed from the clones' extreme individuality and how similar they were to Jango Fett. To Kaminoans, Jango was a perfect specimen of humanity, embodying all the contradictions and curiosities that had intrigued and infuriated the Kaminoan clone masters for millennia. In an internal memo, senior research geneticist Hali Kerr described the Kaminoans' assessment of Jango in the following way. He is a killer many times over, ending the life of others without hesitation if paid to do so. Yet, his anger was obvious when I suggested he lacked morality. He is one of the most able, competent humans I have ever observed, remaining calm in situations that would leave most organics helpless with terror. Yet he witnessed horrors in his childhood that he will not discuss, and around which his mind has constructed apparently impenetrable barriers. Django is given to solitude and affects a disdain for human relationship and connections. Yet, when he agreed to help train our army, he immediately summoned a band of mercenaries who shared his background. And of course, there's the matter of his fee. Django seemed barely to care for the considerable sum of 5 million credits, but was adamant that we create an unadulterated clone of himself, whom he refers to, without a trace of self-consciousness, as his son. I have seen him return to Kamino after killing men for credits, wash the blood out of his starship's hold, and an hour later be gently talking and playing with young Boba. To the Kaminoans, this just didn't compute. It was illogical, contradictory, and beyond their understanding, and like most beings, the Kaminoans feared what they didn't understand. The regular clones were their attempt to create a version of Django that fit the perceptions of how a sentient being should act. But the ARC troopers were unaltered, and they each shared most or all of Django's quirks. They defied all the Kaminoans' perceptions about what a clone soldier should be like, and to the Kaminoans, there was almost nothing more dangerous than that. For the first 3 months of the Clone Wars, the Kaminoans kept the ARCs in suspended animation, but during the first Battle of Kamino, they released them to aid the defense of Tipoca City. After Kamino, the ARCs were integrated into the Grand Army of the Republic and the Republic Special Operations Brigade, typically assigned to prominent command roles. Most acted as liaisons for Jedi generals, serving as middlemen between the Jedi and their clone troops. One such ARC liaison was Alpha 17, who served alongside Obi-Wan Kenobi and his Padawan Anakin Skywalker. Alpha became a valuable addition to Kenobi's command team, providing valuable insight and strategic advice in battle. His independent streak and unique personality proved to be an asset, not a hindrance in most cases. Alpha served alongside Kenobi and Skywalker for several months, fighting alongside the two Jedi from Kamino to Jabiim. On Jabiim, he and Kenobi were presumed dead when their AT-AT was destroyed, but in reality they had been captured by Asajj Ventress. After weeks of torture, Kenobi and Alpha escaped Ventress's dungeons on Ratatak and returned to Republic space. After their return to the greater galaxy, Alpha and Kenobi parted ways. Alpha had decided to return to Kamino, where he planned to establish a training program for clone commanders. Virtually every single clone commander you're familiar with was a graduate of Alpha 17's program. Alpha trained new commanders and veterans alike, teaching them to act with greater individuality and creativity. In effect, Alpha trained the commanders to act more like ARC troopers. On the suggestion of Anakin Skywalker, Alpha also assigned the commanders proper names, something the Jedi had previously encouraged, though it had never really caught on until then. Alpha's first class, which included Captain Rex and Commander Cody, was incredibly successful, and thus the training program continued throughout the Clone Wars. As Alpha's retrained commanders began acting with greater independence, their subordinates followed suit. Soon enough, clones all over the Grand Army of the Republic were taking initiative and speaking their minds to their superiors more often, acting with much greater individuality than was ever tolerated on Kamino. Clones began choosing names, styling their hair in unique ways, and customizing the paint jobs of their armor. In other words, they became the clones we all know and love. None of that would have happened were it not for Alpha 17 and, by extension, the other ARC troopers. Their influence revolutionized the Grand Army of the Republic, breathing into it the humanity that the Kaminoans had tried to stifle. Alpha 17, in case you didn't know, was actually supposed to make an appearance in Star Wars: The Clone Wars. He was cut because George Lucas thought there were too many characters whose names started with A, so the writing team came up with a new clone character to take his place, Captain Rex. Anyway, what do you think of the original ARC troopers? Would you like to see Alpha in future Star Wars media? Let us know all your thoughts and more in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.